Hey guys, my name's Scott Johnson. I'm 48 years old. I live near Augusta, Georgia, and I just wanted to share a little bit of my story about finding out that I had a tumor about 2 weeks ago. It's a vestibular Schwannoma, acoustic neuroma. And I tell you what, some of my Baptist friends are thinking I'm talking in tongues, but that's the name of the tumor, I promise. But I want to kind of catch you up to speed on the process of what I've had to go through the last 2 years in finding out I did have a brain tumor. So let me take you back to January of 2024. And I woke up one morning and walked into the kitchen, and I told my wife, I was like, I feel like I'm hearing through a drum. I feel like I have water behind my ear, like I've been swimming. So I'm literally jumping up and down in the kitchen trying to get the water out of my ear, and of course nothing's coming out. And I was like, I feel like I need to pop my ear. So I'm over here and I'm trying to pop my ear and about to make myself pass out because I'm doing it so much, and it never pops and I can never get any water to come out. So my wife suggested I take some over-the-counter medication. So I started doing that, and after 2 to 3 weeks, nothing really happened at all. And so finally I had an annual checkup with my regular physician, my doctor. And so I went and he said, have you taken any Flonase for this? And I was like, no, I have not. And he said, well, take some Flonase and see if it corrects itself. And I said, okay. So I came home, took some Flonase for a week or two, didn't do anything different. So I ended up calling him back and I said, hey, can I get on an antibiotic? I feel like that would maybe help me. And he actually said, no, I'm going to refer you to an ENT doctor here in Augusta. So I went to this doctor and he looked behind my ear and he said, Scott, there's no fluid behind your ear at all. And he said, have you ever had chickenpox? I had chickenpox for sure. So I said, yes, when I was small I did. And he said, well, Scott, there's a virus that can live in your ear from chickenpox, and it's kind of like shingles. It can just attack a certain part of your body, just something triggers it. So he said, I think what's happened is this virus has attacked your right ear, and really specifically your eardrum. And he said, so what I want to do is, he said, I want to give you some steroid shots directly into your ear, and then specifically into your eardrum over a 6-week period. Now at this point, I have always talked on my cell phone with my right ear, but up until this point, by the time I'm seeing him, I no longer can talk on my right ear. I'm having to talk on my left ear because I just can't hear. And so he also had done a hearing test when I first went to him, and he says, you do have moderate hearing loss. So this is something that's affecting, your ear. So we started doing the steroid shots. I went to him once a week for 5 or 6 weeks. The first week they cut a slit in your eardrum, and of course they deadened it before they did that. And you would just feel your eardrum fill up with this steroid liquid, and then you would lay like this for about 15 or 20 minutes before they would let you go. So I consistently did that for the 5 or 6 weeks, and nothing was fazed by it. I still couldn't hear very well out of that ear. And so he said the next step is for us to do an MRI just to weed out anything major causing this particular hearing loss. And I said, okay. And so he said, I'm going to call you in an MRI. They'll call you and schedule you an appointment. So I was pretty gung-ho about it at first, but then a month went by, another month went by, and I kind of forgot about it. I also had looked at how much it was going to be, and I was like, I don't have $750 just for someone to tell me, hey, you can't hear out of this ear. It's a virus. So when they did call about 60 days or 75 days in, I declined the MRI. I said, look, I don't think I'll need it. I'm not having any other symptoms at this point. If it was a brain tumor, I'm telling myself it would have been something else that was, showing signs. So I canceled it. And I remember some of my friends that I go to church with saying, dude, you should have had that MRI. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm $750 richer because I didn't have to do it. I'm fine. So we continue on through the end of the year. I'm having to face people with my good ear for them to talk to me because I just really can't hear out of this ear. Apparently it's getting worse. And so I have to ask people to repeat themselves at church, which is probably the worst place to be when you have this problem because of all the undercurrent of people's noises. You just can't really pick out that person's voice that's speaking to you unless you're really directing your good ear toward them. So that got progressively worse. I would be walking down the street as an example, and my son would come out into the garage. I would not see him, and he would say, "Dad." And I couldn't pinpoint where that noise was coming from. It's like I had just one ear, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly where he was at. And so that started happening. And then about the same time, 2 to 3 months ago, so now we're in probably March of 2025, I've started noticing that I would lose my balance ever so slightly. So I would just be walking, and I would take a half a step, and I'm like, that's not me. Or I'd maybe kind of bump into the wall a little bit. And I'm like, I'm 48. I feel like I'm in pretty good condition. I don't normally run into things like that. So that concerned me. But really, probably what concerned me the most was when I would be around a lot of friends and they were telling some good jokes and stories, I would start laughing. I love to laugh. And so I would laugh really hard. And at certain times, I would have, at the end of my laugh, I would have these, I guess, searing pains is the only type of way to describe it. I would just have these massive pains that seemed to go across the whole front of the forehead, and it would just feel like bam, bam, bam. And I'd almost have to close my eyes, and it felt like I was about to pass out. I never have passed out, but it felt like, it was getting darker, and it hurt so bad. And then it would last for about 3 or 4 seconds, and then it would dissipate. So that kind of worried me. We were at a restaurant one night with some friends after church, and that happened. He was telling me a funny story about a prank he pulled on his coworker, and I'm laughing so hard, and I'm starting over and over to have these pains. I'm like, you got to quit telling me these funny stories because you're going to kill me. And he's like, Scott, we need to go back and get the referral for the MRI. I work at the hospital where that was, originated. If we can find that referral, I'm sure they can honor that after checking with your doctor. So that next week, he checked on it. A nurse found the referral for the MRI. They called it back in, and after verifying they were going to do the whole head, because I wanted to prove to my wife that I did have a brain and not just, a picture of my ear. They relented, and they did the whole brain scan with the MRI. So this was like 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday. I had the MRI done. And it's funny because I've never been in a MRI machine before, and so I was like, do I want to keep my eyes open during this entire procedure, or do I just want to shut my eyes and play it safe? And so I decided I would play it safe by closing my eyes. And I remember being put into the tube. You're like, Mrr. And I'm keeping my eyes closed, and I'm like, I'm getting scared. So I remember the Bible verse, when I am afraid, I will trust in thee. So I just kept repeating that verse to myself over and over for about 5 minutes until I felt more comfortable. Still didn't open my eyes. Could hear a lot of noise, even though you had headphones. And after about 15 minutes, probably, they pull you out. They put the contrast in your vein, and then they slide you back in for about another 5 to 7 minutes. And then the procedure's over. And I remember coming out of the MRI machine, looking up, and I had about that much space, which I was like, oh, that's a pretty good amount of space. I thought it was going to be like right at my nose. But this particular machine had a lot of room, at least I thought it was, as I came out. So that was on Wednesday. I called my doctor that day after getting the CD from them. I requested the CD of the MRI so I could leave with it, and they obliged. And so I called my doctor, my ENT, and said, hey, I've got this MRI CD. Can I meet with you guys about it? And they said, yes, come in tomorrow morning. So came in that morning, and I haven't been there in about a year because it's been a year since I last had those shots with my ENT. So I gave them the disc, and I said, hey, can I go ahead and have a hearing test while he looks at this? Because I just feel like I've really lost some hearing. And so after having a hearing test, I remember taking off my headphones, and I told the girl, I said, I don't think I can hardly hear anything. And she's like, you have severe hearing loss, Scott. And I was like, well, that's what I expected or suspected. So I went back to the room and waited on the doctor, and he comes in and says, how you doing? And I tell him about, having the head pains and the other things that I've experienced. And he said, okay. And he said, this is my nurse so-and-so. And I was like, well, nice to meet you. And then he sat down and he's like, Scott, you have a large brain tumor. He said, you have a brain tumor. It's very large, but it's benign. And for the first half a second, I really thought he was joking with me, honestly, because I've known this guy, last year we met together 6 or 7 times during those shots, and he's a fun guy to be with. And so when he said that, I kind of took a second and I said, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yes." And I was like, he's like, "I'm very serious." And I said, "Well, I thought you were joking." And he said, "No, let me show you what this looks like." And so we'll show you here what that tumor looks like. It's a little over an inch long and about an inch wide, and it is considered a large tumor. So the actual dimensions were 2.95 centimeters by 2.1 by 2.95 centimeters. And so they call that a large one. And he said, "Scott, you're going to have surgery. Even though it's benign, it's pushing up against your brain stem, which is probably why you're losing your balance a little bit." And he said, the other thing is, once they remove this tumor, they're going to take your acoustic nerve completely out, which will really eliminate all of your hearing for the rest of your life, because you need the acoustic nerve to hear. But because that tumor has attached itself to this, they'll have to take the whole thing out. And so I had thought to myself a couple weeks prior, I wonder if it would be better not to hear out of this ear, because it's so hard to distinguish people's voices and different sounds, that I thought, I wonder if it'd be better to hear out of one ear versus two. And so apparently I'm going to get my wish on that. And when they do surgery, it'll be a trans surgery is what they call. There's a retro, there's a trans. And this will be a surgery, again, that removes the acoustic nerve. In all honesty, what he also told me while I was there is about the facial nerve, which of course runs through that same part of the brain. And the larger the tumor, the higher the risk of damaging the facial nerve. And of course that controls your face movements. And so if it's severed, of course you'll have a very, drooping type face. Some of that can be temporary though, and come back over time. And so I guess at this point, my main concern, after having the tumor, having surgery on it, is how is that facial nerve going to do? That's more of a concern of mine, which might be maybe a prideful thing. But, it's one of those things that I'm just working through and trusting the Lord for. The other part of this is we have, at that point, started calling doctors and looking for consultations. And so doing our research, this is just how the Lord works. That weekend, after I found out that I did have the tumor, my boss put me on his prayer list at his church, and specifically for their Sunday school class. And after the Sunday school class, a member of his class came up and said, "Hey, I've had this exact surgery that Scott's going to be scheduled to have. Can you put me in touch with him? I'd like to speak to him." And so what was really neat was my wife and I were able to call him about 2 weeks ago now, right after we found out, and he talked to us for over an hour about what he had done. He had the same surgery that I'm going to have more than likely, where they took out the acoustic nerve, and just kind of walked me through what the surgery was like, the recovery was like, what kind of time frame certain things happened. And so that was very, very helpful. And so that's one thing that we've done. In addition to that, last week we had another individual through a person I went to school with back in high school. He's a pastor, and he has a lady in his congregation that talked to me and my wife over the phone again this past Monday night, and kind of talked about her experience. And so tomorrow is our first consultation with the doctor. We are going to meet with 2 doctors here in Augusta at this point. And then we're also speaking to a hospital in California, UC San Diego Health. I've sent my MRI there in my information. So I believe they'll be calling me in the next week or 2. So I'll keep you updated on that. But what we're trying to do is just, find out what the doctor will say about the MRI, how close is the tumor to the brainstem, the actual facial nerve, what are the chances of getting it removed without facial paralysis, those type of questions that I'll have. And then we'll get different viewpoints from different doctors. Do they all want to do the same type of surgery? Would they want to do something different? And so at this point, we're just really gathering information for this month of August, just trying to figure out, where is the Lord leading us? We're praying that, God will give us that direction. We know He will, but we want to be wise and know what his will is in this, because through this process, what I've learned is that, and I knew this, but knowing something and really believing it is two different things when it comes to you personally. And so what I've come to understand, of course, is that God is always in control, and God is not surprised that Scott Johnson has a tumor in his head. He knew that before the foundation of the world, but he has a plan. And one of the things that's encouraged me is I was challenged by my boss I mentioned earlier that, Scott, God sends things in our life, trials, you will say, and ultimately he wants to get the glory for it. And you get to participate in that through this situation. And so part of the reason I want to share with this and this whole process is to give God glory. God's still good. No matter what happens to me, facial paralysis or not, God has a plan, a perfect plan. And I just want to be found faithful. That's my job through this, is the way I'm approaching it. I've got great family supporting me, great friends. And so tomorrow we'll go and we'll meet our first doctor, and then we'll find out again what he's going to say. And then we'll check back in with you guys here in the next couple of weeks and give you an update. And ultimately, hopefully you'll be on us throughout this whole journey. So thank you so much for watching this video.